Hi, I'm Pete Lesher, Chief Curator for the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, and welcome to Chesapeake Treasure. Today we're going to be talking about our new exhibition which just opened, Exploring the Chesapeake, Mapping the Bay. Come along with me and I'd like to show you a few of the treasures in this exhibition. So what I want to show you today are several maps that were produced by the United States Coast Survey. This is among the earliest of the Coast Survey charts in our collection, and it's from the head of the bay, the Susquehanna Flats, in 1836. And if you look at the beautiful lettering, the typography in here, it's not what you would expect from a government chart. It's a little fancier than what we've later come to expect as for government charts. But this is early. This is 1836, and it shows the mouth of the Susquehanna River and the town of Havre de Grace, and then the Susquehanna Flats with, as it is marked, the usual route of steamers up the flats. That is the deeper water through these very shallow this very shallow part of the Chesapeake that boasts a lot of underwater grasses that waterfowl have long feasted on. But this was navigable water too. And the wonderful thing about this particular chart is that you can see something of the method of the government chart makers who were using this. They would take probably a rowing boat, a small boat, and go a distance from shore to a known point in a straight line. And along that line, they would take soundings, measurements of the depth of the water. And they mark all these depths as they take them along this line. And so you get a sense of the bathymetry, the underwater shape in these straight lines of soundings. This, of course, is in fact how if you look at a modern day chart, you'll see sort of soundings sort of randomly placed around, and lines that show the 6-foot depth and the 12-foot depth and the 18-foot depth. There are some depth contours that they derive from this soundings data, but this gives you an idea of how all of that data was derived. Let's take a look at the next. Over here we have a pair of charts that were prepared by the Coast Survey in the 1850s showing how they got the shoreline right. If you look at early maps and charts, you see these distorted shapes of the shorelines. But of course, with scientific charting that the government introduced with the Coast Survey, they really came up with pretty precise measurements. And in this 1854 chart, you see a series of triangles up and down the bay where they would take one known distance, one baseline distance, and then get precise angles off of that to create a triangle. And from simple geometry, they could determine the length of the other two legs of the triangle. And from that, one of those other legs would become the baseline for a new triangle. And so they went on down the bay, putting the ends of these triangles on particular points that allowed them to get the shape of the bay just right. They would do this every season. They would spend the good weather out surveying, and then at the end of the season they would come back and immediately publish this material. And so we would see the progress of their survey and in sort of incomplete data as they were at the end of the season in 1854. And then the next year they would publish again, and each year going out. And so again in this exhibition we have the progress that they made by 1857, and we can see compared to 1854 that they had mapped out much of the James River, the York River, and the Rappahannock River. They still had more progress to do on the Potomac River and other tributaries of the Chesapeake. They started with the main trunk of the bay and went with these others. But we see how the Coast Survey is laying this out in those pre-Civil War years. But there's a real treasure that tells us even more later on in this exhibition. Possibly the most spectacular of all the maps or charts in this exhibition is this manuscript chart, almost 7 feet by 7 feet, of the topography of Talbot County. And in this case, this was drawn by an officer of the Coast Survey by the name of John L. Tillman in 1857 from data that they were gathering beginning in the mid-1840s. And this was probably done, we don't know precisely why this was done, but this was probably done so that they could work out some of the detail on a very large scale. This particular map is drawn at a scale of almost 3 inches to the mile. Much larger scale than the eventual published charts of this section of the bay would have been. And then this later became sort of a presentation piece that Tillman passed on to a cousin of his, by which it ultimately made its way to the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum. Take a look at this. This is also available scanned because this was one of the pieces that we had conserved for this exhibition. Incredible detail offered on this spectacular chart of Talbot County. Thank you for joining me this week for Chesapeake Treasure.